The first light of dawn filtered through the pine trees as Shadow froze mid-step. His scarred ears twitched forward, catching an unfamiliar sound that didn't belong in his woodland sanctuary. 3 years in these woods had taught him to distinguish between the rustling of deer and the deliberate movements of humans, those who had shown him only cruelty. A soft whimper carried on the morning breeze. Shadow's muscles tensed, battle-worn instincts screaming danger. Yet something about this sound differed from the threats he'd known. Cautiously, he crept forward, his paws silent against the forest floor, until he spotted a small form crumpled beneath an ancient oak tree. A child, unconscious, vulnerable. The German shepherd's breathing quickened, torn between approach and retreat. Fresh wounds of memory pulsed with each heartbeat, but as the small chest rose and fell with labored breaths, Shadow made a decision that defied everything his scars had taught him about humans. What happened next would shock an entire town and change both their broken lives forever. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Pine Creek, Montana, nestled in the embrace of towering mountains and ancient forests, a postcard-perfect town where everybody knew everybody, or thought they did. The dense woodland stretching beyond the town limits held secrets, and among them, Shadow had carved out a solitary existence far from human reach. 7 years old and bearing the battle scars of a warrior. Shadow was no ordinary German shepherd. The glossy black coat that had once gleamed with military precision now hung patchy over a frame still powerful but leaner than in his service days. His amber eyes, once clear and confident, now darted constantly, searching for threats in every shadow. The network of scars crisscrossing his body told stories of unspeakable cruelty, puncture wounds from fights he'd been forced into, burn marks from cigarettes pressed against his skin, and the long surgical scar where someone had removed his military identification microchip. Home was an abandoned ranger station, its weathered walls providing shelter that Shadow trusted more than any human dwelling. Here, he'd taught himself to hunt small game, to avoid the hiking trails, and to become virtually invisible to the occasional hunter. The few who had glimpsed him spoke of a ghost dog, a legend whispered about in the town's only diner. 6-year-old Emma Thompson had only known Pine Creek for 2 months. Arriving after her father's deployment to Afghanistan and subsequent MIA status had upended her world. With golden hair often tied in mismatched ribbons and eyes carrying wisdom beyond her years, Emma moved through life with the cautious hope of a child who'd already learned that adults could disappear. Her new stepmother, Diane, maintained a picture-perfect image around town while harboring secrets that darkened their home behind closed doors. Sheriff Jim Calloway had seen enough in his 58 years to recognize when something didn't add up. Vietnam had taught him to trust his gut, and something about Diane Thompson's story raised the hair on his neck. Dr. Martha Wilson, the town's veterinarian of 30 years, kept a special place in her heart for military working dogs, having treated many during her early career with the Army. Eleanor Thompson, Emma's grandmother, lived just outside town limits, her weathered hands and kind eyes carrying the weight of a family fractured by war and loss. She watched her new daughter-in-law with the quiet suspicion of a woman who had survived too much to be easily fooled. Shadow's ears pricked up at the unnatural sound of an engine disturbing the pre-dawn silence. Humans rarely ventured this deep into the woods, especially at night. The noise sent tremors through his battle-scarred body, triggering memories he'd fought to bury. His muscles tensed instinctively, ready to flee deeper into the forest sanctuary that had been his only safety for 18 months. The headlights cut through the darkness nearly a mile away, but to Shadow's heightened senses, they might as well have been searchlights hunting him down. He pressed his body against the cool earth of his den, a hollowed space beneath the collapsed ranger station. As the engine grew louder, Shadow's breathing quickened, his mind flashing back to the roar of trucks that had transported him between fighting venues, men with scarred knuckles and alcohol-soured breath, the metallic scent of blood in sawdust rings. Pain. Always pain. Shadow whimpered softly, paws twitching as if still trying to escape chains that no longer bound him. It took several moments for reality to return: the scent of pine needles, the distant call of an owl, the knowledge that he was free, different, safe. The vehicle stopped somewhere near the old hiking trail that hadn't been maintained in years. Shadow hesitated, curiosity warring with caution. Something about this intrusion felt wrong in ways that transcended his fear of humans. Slipping from his den, Shadow moved like a shadow himself, paws silent against the forest floor as he navigated by moonlight between familiar trees. The scents of the forest told stories with every breath: the fox that had passed through hours earlier, the family of raccoons in the hollow oak, the decaying leaves preparing for autumn's full arrival. But now, new scents: gasoline, synthetic fabric, human sweat tinged with something sharp and chemical, and fear, the unmistakable scent of human fear. Shadow crept closer, keeping downwind. Through the underbrush, he could make out a large black SUV, its engine now silent. A woman emerged from the driver's side, her movement stiff and deliberate. She opened the rear door and leaned in, emerging with something in her arms, something that made Shadow's hackles rise. A child. Small. Female. Partially awake but not struggling. "Come on, Emma. We're going on a little adventure," the woman said, her voice carrying an artificial sweetness that didn't match her scent of anger and fear. The little girl mumbled something incoherent as the woman set her down on unsteady feet. "Where are we? I'm sleepy. Diane?" "Just a special camping trip, sweetie. Your daddy and I used to come here." The woman Diane slung a small backpack over the child's shoulders. "There's some water and snacks in there. You just follow this path until you find the big clearing. I'll be right behind you with the rest of our stuff." Shadow watched the child rub her eyes, confusion evident even from his hidden vantage point. She couldn't be more than 6 or 7, dressed in pajamas with a light jacket hastily pulled over them. The autumn night carried a chill that made Shadow's old injuries ache. It would be worse for the underdressed child. "I don't want to go by myself," the little girl Emma protested weakly. Diane's artificial patience cracked slightly. "Emma, this is important. Your father would want you to be brave. Now go on ahead while I get things ready." Something in the woman's tone made Shadow's instincts flare with warning. He'd heard similar tones before, the false reassurance before pain followed. The girl seemed to sense it, too, her small shoulders tensing, but she turned and began walking unsteadily down the overgrown path, guided by the beam of a small flashlight Diane had thrust into her hand. As soon as Emma disappeared into the trees, Diane's demeanor changed completely. She quickly returned to the vehicle, started the engine, and executed a careful three-point turn. Within moments, the SUV was retreating back toward the main road, leaving Emma alone in the wilderness. Shadow remained frozen in disbelief. Even in his world of dog-fighting pits and cruelty, the abandonment of a pack member, especially a pup, was unthinkable. Yet he'd just witnessed a human abandon her own young. The forest fell silent again except for the diminishing sound of the vehicle and the faint, rhythmic flash of the small light moving deeper into the woods. Shadow hesitated, torn between retreating to his den and following the abandoned child. Humans had brought him nothing but pain, had taught him that distance meant survival. But a pup alone in the woods wouldn't survive the night. Reluctantly, keeping a safe distance, Shadow began to track the child. The little beam of light bobbed erratically as Emma made her way through the increasingly difficult terrain. The path Diane had mentioned barely existed, having been reclaimed by nature years ago. Shadow could see the girl stumbling, her breath coming in frightened gasps that formed small clouds in the cool air. "Diane," she called out several times, her voice growing more desperate with each unanswered plea. "Mommy, Diane, I can't find the clearing." Shadow winced at the volume these woods housed coyotes and the occasional mountain lion. The child might as well have been announcing herself as prey. Still, he kept his distance, unwilling to add to her fear by revealing himself. After nearly an hour of wandering, Emma's flashlight beam began to weaken. Her path became more erratic, circling back on itself. Shadow could smell the salt of tears mixing with her exhaustion. When she finally collapsed at the base of a massive oak tree, it seemed more from emotional defeat than physical tiredness. "Daddy," she whispered to herself, curling into a small ball against the tree trunk. "Daddy, please come find me." The words stirred something deep in Shadow's memory, a different human voice calling for help, a command to seek, to find, to rescue. Before the fighting pits, before the pain, when he had a purpose beyond survival, Emma's flashlight flickered one last time before going dark, leaving her illuminated only by fragments of moonlight filtering through the canopy. She began to shiver, her thin jacket woefully inadequate as the temperature continued to drop. Shadow could see her breath coming in increasingly visible puffs. Another hour passed. The girl had fallen into an uneasy sleep, her body occasionally twitching with cold or dreams. Shadow had gradually moved closer, watching for signs of other predators. A light mist began to fall, further dropping the temperature. The German shepherd stood on the precipice of a decision. Every instinct, honed by years of abuse, told him to maintain distance from humans, especially small ones, with unpredictable movements and high-pitched voices. The scars across his muzzle pulsed with phantom pain at the memory of children who had poked sticks through his cage or thrown rocks at him during his captivity. Yet something else pulled at him, a fragment of his earlier life, of purpose and connection. The child would not survive until morning without warmth. The equation was that simple. When Emma's shivering became violent enough to wake her briefly, Shadow made his decision. With extreme caution, he approached, body low to the ground, movements deliberate and non-threatening. when he was within 10 feet. Emma's eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus in the darkness. The moment she saw his silhouette, her breath caught. Shadow froze, ready to retreat if she screamed or made sudden movements. Instead, she simply stared, perhaps too cold and confused to feel proper fear. "Doggy," she whispered hoarsely. Shadow inched forward, ears flattened submissively, until he was close enough for her to see him clearly in the dim light. He saw her eyes widen at his size, at the visible scars that mapped his face and body. But instead of fear, her expression held something Shadow hadn't seen directed toward him in years' wonder. "Are you lost, too?" Emma asked, her voice weak. Shadow eased closer still, until he was near enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from his body. He carefully lowered himself to the ground beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could reach out if she chose to. For several long moments, they remained in this careful tableau, the scarred German shepherd and the abandoned child, each assessing the other, each carrying wounds visible and invisible. When Emma's shivering intensified, Shadow made his final approach. With exquisite gentleness, he pressed his body against hers, offering the only gift he had: warmth. The girl stiffened momentarily, then relaxed, instinctively turning toward the heat source. "Good doggy," she murmured, her small hand hesitantly touching his fur. Shadow tensed at the contact but held his position. As Emma's breathing steadied and her shivering lessened, Shadow kept vigil, his amber eyes scanning the darkness around them. For the first time since his escape, the German shepherd was no longer alone. And despite everything humans had taught him to fear, despite the scars that would never fade, Shadow stayed. Shadow's gentle nudge against Emma's cheek came with the first light of dawn. The girl had fallen into a fitful sleep against his warm body, her breathing shallow but steady throughout the night. Now, as morning birds began their chorus, Shadow sensed a change in her condition. Her skin radiated an unnatural heat that even his fur couldn't explain. Emma's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Daddy," she whispered, reaching out to touch Shadow's scarred muzzle. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, allowing the contact despite the instinct to flinch away. Her small fingers traced the line of an old wound that ran from his eye to his jaw, a souvenir from his second fight in the pit. "You're not Daddy," she murmured, disappointment clouding her features before recognition dawned. "You're the dog from last night. You kept me warm." Shadow watched as the child struggled to sit up, her movements sluggish and uncoordinated. The scent of illness was becoming stronger, a subtle change in her natural odor that triggered memories long buried in Shadow's mind. In another life, he'd been trained to detect changes in human physiology: fear, illness, distress, skills that made him valuable in the field. Before everything changed. "I don't feel good," Emma whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. The morning temperature wasn't dangerously low, but the night's exposure combined with stress had clearly taken its toll. Shadow nudged the small backpack that lay forgotten beside her. With trembling hands, Emma unzipped it, finding a half-empty water bottle and a single granola bar. "Diane didn't pack much for our adventure," she said, her young voice carrying a bitter understanding beyond her years. She sipped the water cautiously before breaking off a small piece of the granola bar. To Shadow's surprise, she held out the larger portion to him. "You should eat too. My daddy says we always share with friends." The word friend made Shadow's ears twitch. It had been so long since he'd been anything but a weapon or a ghost. With delicate precision, he accepted the offering from her palm, careful not to touch her skin with his teeth. The simple act, taking food from human hands without fear, unlocked something tight and painful in his chest. As Emma ate her meager breakfast, Shadow detected the rumble of distant vehicles on the main road miles away. Too far for Emma to reach in her condition, especially given the rough terrain and her disorientation. His gaze shifted between the direction of the road and the increasingly feverish child. "I think Diane is mad at me," Emma said suddenly, her voice small. "She doesn't like it when I talk about my real mom or when I ask when Daddy's coming home. Last night she got a phone call that made her really angry. She said we needed to take care of things right away." Shadow cocked his head, listening not just to her words but to the rising fever in her voice. Emma rambled on, her thoughts becoming less coherent as her temperature climbed. Daddy's dog tags were in Diane's special box. She said he sent them, but that's not right. Daddy never takes them off. That's what he promised. And there were papers with strange stamps. Her voice trailed off as she leaned back against the tree trunk, suddenly exhausted by the short conversation. Shadow's body went rigid. The words "dog tags" triggered a cascade of memories, the weight of metal discs against his chest during training exercises. The specific sound they made when his handler moved, the scent of the metal warmed by human skin. He'd been trained to locate them, to follow their scent, to associate them with his unit. The coincidence was too specific to ignore. This child's daddy and Shadow's past shared a connection that his canine mind couldn't fully articulate but instinctively recognized. Emma's head lolled to the side, her fever climbing visibly now. Shadow whined softly, pressing his nose against her flushed cheek. The response was immediate. Her skin was dangerously hot, her breathing increasingly labored. Night exposure followed by fever could be fatal for a pup this small. Making a decision, Shadow circled the oak tree, searching for the most sheltered position, finding a slight depression protected by the massive root system. He returned to Emma and gently tugged at her sleeve, attempting to guide her to the better location. "You want me to move?" she asked weakly, attempting to follow his lead. Shadow supported her weight against his side as she crawled the short distance to the natural shelter. Once there, he carefully positioned himself around her, creating a living barrier against the elements. Miles away, in the Pine Creek Sheriff's Office, a very different scene was unfolding. Diane Thompson's mascara-streaked face crumpled in apparent distress as Sheriff Jim Calloway took notes across his desk. "I tucked her in around 8, then checked on her at midnight before going to bed myself," Diane explained, twisting a tissue between manicured fingers. "When I went to wake her for breakfast at 7, her bed was empty. The back door was unlocked. She must have wandered out in the night." Sheriff Calloway's weathered face remained impassive, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "Any idea why Emma might leave in the middle of the night? Mrs. Thompson, has she done anything like this before?" "Never," Diane insisted. "She's been having nightmares since Frank went missing, calling out for him. Maybe she was sleepwalking, looking for her father." Her voice broke dramatically on the last word. Deputy Reynolds entered with a quick knock, holding a clipboard. "Search parties assembled at Riverside Park, sir. That's where Mrs. Thompson thinks Emma might have gone, says she loves the swings there." Sheriff Calloway nodded, rising from his desk. "We'll find her, Mrs. Thompson. Children rarely go far." As he reached for his jacket, he added, "Might be good to call Emma's grandmother. Eleanor knows these woods better than most." A flash of something annoyance concern crossed Diane's features before smoothing into grateful agreement. "Of course. I'll call her right away." Back in the forest, Emma's condition deteriorated rapidly as morning gave way to afternoon. Her lucid moments became fewer, separated by periods of restless sleep and incoherent murmuring. Shadow remained vigilant, leaving only once to lap water from a nearby stream, returning with his fur wet enough to offer some relief when pressed against her fevered skin. During one brief moment of clarity, Emma clutched at Shadow's ruff, her eyes suddenly focused and intense. "You're a soldier dog, aren't you? Like the ones Daddy worked with?" Shadow's ears pricked forward at the words, a reflex response to terminology he'd once known well. "Daddy trained dogs like you. He showed me pictures." Her small hand moved to a spot on Shadow's shoulder where, beneath the fur, a faded tattoo remained his military identification that the dogfighters hadn't discovered. He said military dogs are heroes, the bravest kind. The word bravest triggered another memory, his handler using that exact praise after Shadow had completed a particularly difficult detection exercise. For a moment, the German Shepherd was transported back to his former life, the training fields, the satisfaction of completed missions, the bond with his handler. Emma's soft voice pulled him back to the present. "I'm scared," she admitted. "If you're really a military dog, can you help me get home, like a mission?" Before Shadow could react, Emma's moment of lucidity passed. Her eyes unfocused again as she slipped back into fevered sleep, murmuring fragments about Daddy and secret papers and not supposed to tell. Dark clouds gathered overhead as afternoon waned, bringing the threat of rain. Shadow's instincts screamed warnings about the dropping temperature and the child's worsening condition. Emma needed human help, the kind Shadow couldn't provide. Yet the thought of approaching the town, of voluntarily seeking humans after everything he'd endured, sent waves of terror through his scarred body. The first heavy raindrops began to fall, splattering against the leaves above them. Emma stirred restlessly as the temperature dropped further. Shadow made his decision he would stay through the night, keeping her as warm and dry as possible. If her condition didn't improve by morning, he would have to overcome his deepest fears and seek human assistance, regardless of the risk to himself. Miles away, the search for Emma Thompson had shifted to Riverside Park and the surrounding neighborhoods. Volunteers with flashlights called her name as darkness fell, their focus entirely on the wrong location. At the Thompson house, Eleanor arrived to find Diane speaking urgently in hushed tones on her cell phone on the back porch. "I don't care what it takes. This needs to be handled now," Diane was saying, her back to the door. "If she tells anyone about those papers—" She stopped abruptly, sensing Eleanor's presence. "I'll have to call you back. Emma's grandmother is here." Eleanor's eyes, sharp despite her 68 years, took in Diane's composed facade. "Any news about my granddaughter?" "Nothing yet," Diane replied, her voice carefully modulated to display the right amount of concern. "The sheriff has everyone looking near the park." Eleanor studied her daughter-in-law's face. "Emma's never mentioned caring much for that park. Now, the old hiking trails where Frank used to take her, that's where that child feels close to her daddy?" Diane's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "The sheriff's department has to start somewhere, Eleanor. I'm sure they know what they're doing." As night fully descended, the rain increased from scattered drops to a steady downpour. In their shelter beneath the oak, Shadow pressed himself more firmly against Emma's small body, creating a living shield against the elements. His military training had included weather survival. He understood hypothermia and its dangers for humans. Throughout the night, he continuously adjusted his position, ensuring that his body heat transferred to the increasingly unresponsive child. The rain soaked through his outer coat, but his dense undercoat remained relatively dry, maintaining the crucial warmth Emma needed. Each time thunder rumbled overhead, Shadow felt her small fingers tighten reflexively in his fur, even in her semi-conscious state. "Sergeant," Emma murmured in delirium. "Sergeant Shadow. Stay on mission." The German shepherd's head snapped up at the words. Sergeant Shadow had been his designation in the military working dog program, a name he hadn't heard in years, replaced by cruel nicknames in the fighting pits, and then no name at all in his solitary existence. How could this child possibly know as lightning briefly illuminated their shelter? Shadow noticed something he'd missed before: a thin metal chain around Emma's neck, mostly hidden beneath her pajama top. During her restless movements, a set of dog tags had become visible, resting against her collarbone. In that moment of revelation, Shadow understood with perfect clarity that his encounter with Emma was no coincidence. The universe that had dealt him so much cruelty had also, perhaps, offered a chance at redemption. This was not just any lost child she was connected to his former life, to the handler who had treated him with respect and kindness before the world went dark. As Emma's breathing grew more labored in the cold night air, Shadow made a silent promise. Whatever it cost him, whatever fears he had to overcome, he would not fail this mission. The child would survive. The storm retreated with the dawn, leaving behind a glistening forest draped in pearls of rainwater and morning mist. Shadow emerged from their makeshift shelter, muscles stiff from maintaining his protective position throughout the night. He shook himself carefully, mindful not to spray the still sleeping Emma with the excess moisture clinging to his coat. The girl's condition had worsened overnight. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, her small chest rising and falling with concerning irregularity. The fever that had begun yesterday now radiated from her in waves Shadow could feel without touching her. Most alarming was her stillness. The restless movements of delirium had given way to an unnatural quiet that triggered Shadow's deepest instincts of danger. Shadow sniffed the air, cataloging the forest's morning scents. The rain had washed away most traces of human activity, but he could detect distant wood smoke from cabins near the forest edge, perhaps 3 miles east. Too far for Emma to walk in her condition, but not beyond his reach if he traveled alone. The thought of leaving her vulnerable sent a surge of protective anger through him. Yet staying meant watching her condition deteriorate beyond hope. Shadow paced in tight circles, whining softly as he deliberated. A weak cough from Emma decided him. The child's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with fever. "Shadow," she whispered, using the name she couldn't possibly know, yet somehow did. "I'm so thirsty." Decision made. Shadow moved with purpose to the nearby stream, now swollen with rainwater. He located a shallow eddy where the water ran clear, dipping his muzzle to soak his jowls thoroughly. Returning to Emma, he positioned his dripping face near her lips, allowing her to lick the moisture from his fur. It was a technique he'd been taught during rescue training, a way to transport small amounts of water when no container was available. The memory of that training surfaced with surprising clarity: the obstacle courses, the scent tracking, the mock rescue operations with volunteers playing injured hikers. Emma managed several small licks before exhaustion overtook her again. "Thank you," she murmured, one small hand resting weakly against his scarred cheek. Shadow repeated the water-carrying process several times until Emma refused more. Her lips were cracked, her skin paper-dry despite the humidity. The fever was dehydrating her dangerously fast. Food would be the next necessity. Shadow hesitated, torn between hunting and staying with Emma. After a moment's deliberation, he began methodically searching the immediate area, never moving more than 20 feet from the oak tree shelter. Luck favored him beneath a rotting log. He discovered a cluster of early autumn hazelnuts that had fallen and been gathered by squirrels. Returning to Emma, Shadow carefully placed the nuts beside her hand. When she didn't respond, he nudged her gently, whining until her eyes opened again. "Nuts?" she asked weakly. "Like a squirrel brought them." Shadow watched as she attempted to crack one between her fingers, failing in her weakened state. With careful precision, he took the nut between his powerful jaws and applied just enough pressure to crack the shell without crushing the meat inside. He repeated this process, preparing several nuts before retreating a few steps to allow Emma to eat. She managed only 2 before fatigue overwhelmed her again. "My head hurts. Shadow. Where's Daddy?" He promised he'd come back. Shadow whined softly, lying down beside her once more. As Emma drifted back into uneasy sleep, his mind worked through the limited options available. The child needed proper medical attention soon, within hours, not days. The forest held no solutions for her condition. In that moment, Shadow made the decision he'd been avoiding since finding Emma. He would need to seek human help, regardless of the danger to himself. The risks were enormous. Humans had shown him only cruelty for years. The scars crisscrossing his body weren't just physical reminders, but psychological anchors to trauma that had taught him humans meant pain. Yet, this small human needed him. Somehow, impossibly. She knew his name, his real name, not the cruel monikers from the fighting pits. She wore dog tags that carried scents of his former life. In his soldier's heart, Shadow recognized a mission that transcended his fear. He would wait until she fell into deeper sleep, then make his approach to the nearest human dwelling. The thought sent tremors of fear through his powerful frame. But Shadow had faced fear before. Once, long ago. He had been brave. As Emma's breathing steadied in sleep, Shadow took one final moment to ensure she was as comfortable as possible. He dragged several fallen branches with leafy coverage to create a better windbreak around their hollow beneath the oak. He made 3 more trips to the stream, soaking his fur so Emma could drink upon waking. Finally, he gathered pine needles to create a softer bed beneath her. Only when these preparations were complete did Shadow permit himself to leave. With one backward glance at the sleeping child, he began moving east toward the scent of wood smoke. his powerful stride eating up distance despite his lingering injuries and the night's exhaustion. The forest thinned gradually as Shadow approached its edge, the ancient trees giving way to younger growth and eventually scattered clearings. With each step toward civilization, his anxiety mounted. Memories of capture, of chains and cages, of roaring crowds and the taste of blood filled his mind. Several times, he nearly turned back, his instinct for self-preservation nearly overwhelming his mission. But each time, the image of Emma's fever-flushed face steadied his resolve. Shadow pressed on, his movements becoming more cautious as he detected fresh human scents ahead. The first cabin appeared through the trees, a small hunting structure with a thin wisp of smoke rising from its stone chimney. Shadow circled downwind, assessing the situation from cover. His military training surfaced as he methodically catalogued potential threats, one vehicle parked outside. Boots on the porch suggesting at least one adult male. No dogs or other animals detected. Taking a deep breath, Shadow forced himself forward, emerging from the tree line into the small clearing surrounding the cabin. Every instinct screamed for him to flee as he deliberately exposed himself, moving with slow, non-threatening posture toward the cabin's front steps. The door opened before he'd made it halfway across the yard. An older man with a gray beard emerged, coffee mug in hand, freezing mid-step when he spotted the large German shepherd. "Well, I'll be damned," the man muttered, setting his mug down carefully on the railing. "Where'd you come from?" "Boy," Shadow halted, fighting the urge to bolt as the human scent reached him. Coffee, gun oil, tobacco. His ears flattened slightly, but he held his ground, trying to communicate without triggering the man's fear. He barked once, then turned back toward the forest, taking several steps before looking over his shoulder. The classic Lassie move was one he'd been trained to perform during search and rescue exercises. If the human understood, he would recognize it as a request to follow. "You want me to come with you?" the man asked, eyebrows rising. His gaze sharpened as he took in Shadow's appearance more carefully, the scars visible even through the dense fur. The military bearing despite his wild appearance. "You're no ordinary stray, are you?" Shadow barked again, more urgently, taking several more steps toward the forest before looking back. The man hesitated, then shook his head. "Sorry, boy. I don't follow strange dogs into the woods. Too many coyotes and mountain lions around here lately." He reached for his mug again, turning away. "If you're hungry, I can put some food out for you." Desperation surged through Shadow. Emma didn't have time for this failure. He barked again, more insistently, then approached the cabin steps, something he would never normally do. The proximity to a human dwelling sent waves of fear through him, but he pushed through it, climbing the first step, then the second. "Whoa there." The man backed up, suddenly wary of the large dog invading his space. "Listen, I don't want any trouble." Shadow ignored the warning tone, forcing himself to continue up the steps until he stood on the porch. There, summoning all his courage, he reached forward and carefully tugged at the man's pant leg with his teeth, applying just enough pressure to communicate urgency without causing fear. The man stared down at him in shock. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "You really are trying to tell me something, aren't you?" Shadow released the fabric and backed up, once more turning toward the forest with clear intention. After a long moment of consideration, the man sighed. My grandniece would never forgive me if I ignored a lassie moment. Let me grab my coat and rifle. Relief flooded through Shadow. He waited impatiently as the man disappeared inside, returning moments later with a jacket, rifle, and backpack. This better not be a wild goose chase. Dog, I'm Bill Thornton. By the way, not that you care. Shadow led Bill back into the forest at a pace the older man could maintain, constantly checking to ensure he was still following. The journey that had taken Shadow less than an hour stretched to nearly 2 with the human in tow. Twice, Bill threatened to turn back, skepticism overcoming his curiosity. Each time, Shadow's increasing urgency convinced him to continue. As they neared the oak tree where Shadow had left Emma, Bill's expression changed from skepticism to concern. You're mighty worked up about something. Dog, what's out here that's got you so... His question cut off abruptly as they cleared a stand of pines and the massive oak came into view. Shadow raced ahead, disappearing into the hollow beneath its roots. When he emerged moments later, barking frantically, Bill broke into a run. Sweet Jesus, the man breathed as he reached the shelter and saw Emma curled on her side, her breathing shallow and her skin burning with fever. There's a child out here who would... He cut himself off, kneeling beside Emma and gently checking her pulse. Hey there, little one? Little, can you hear me? Emma's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Shadow brought help, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Good soldier. Bill glanced at the German shepherd, who stood vigilant beside them, then back to Emma. He sure did, sweetheart. Let's get you warmed up. He shrugged off his backpack, pulling out a space blanket and wrapping it carefully around Emma's small frame. What's your name, honey? How'd you get all the way out here, Mum? Emma, she managed weakly. Thompson. Diane left me. Said it was an adventure. Bill's weathered face hardened at her words. Emma Thompson. Sheriff Calloway's been searching for you since yesterday morning. But they're looking clear on the other side of town. He pulled out a satellite phone from his pack. Let's get you some help right away. As Bill made the call, providing their coordinates to the emergency dispatcher, Shadow remained pressed against Emma's side, offering the warmth and comfort he'd provided through the night. Despite his lingering fear of the man, his mission to protect Emma overrode everything else. They're sending a medical helicopter, Bill told Emma after ending the call. Should be here in about 20 minutes. You just hang tight. He hesitated, then added gently, Can you tell me more about Diane? She's your mama? Stepmom, Emma corrected, her voice strengthening slightly under the warmth of the space blanket. She got mad after the phone call, said Daddy's secrets were causing problems. Bill's expression grew troubled. What kind of secrets? Emma. But Emma had drifted off again, her energy depleted by the brief conversation. Shadow whined softly, nudging her cheek to check her responsiveness. She's in rough shape, Bill murmured, more to himself than to Shadow. Exposure, dehydration, probably pneumonia setting in. He studied the German shepherd with newfound respect. You saved her life, keeping her warm through that storm last night. Where'd you come from? Anyway, those scars tell a hard story. Shadow kept his focus on Emma, though his ears twitched toward Bill's voice. The man seemed different from others Shadow had encountered since his escape. His scent lacked the acrid undertone of cruelty, and his movements around Emma were gentle and careful. Bill reached into his pack again, pulling out a water bottle with a built-in filter. "Let's see if we can get some water into her before the medics arrive." With Shadow's watchful gaze tracking his every move, Bill gently lifted Emma's head and helped her take small sips of water. She managed a few swallows before turning away, but even that small amount seemed to bring her some relief. "You're a good dog," Bill said quietly to Shadow. "Military trained. If I had to guess, I served in Vietnam. Saw dogs like you saving lives out there." He extended his hand slowly, palm up, in a non-threatening gesture. "I'm not going to hurt either of you." Shadow sniffed the offered hand cautiously, detecting old scents of gunpowder, metal, and the distinctive smell of military-issue gear that somehow lingered on this man years after his service. Something about these scents triggered memories of training fields and barracks of a time before the fighting rings. "I bet you got one hell of a story," Bill continued softly. "Those tags she's wearing military issue. You two connected somehow." Before Shadow could decide how to respond to this unusual human, the distant sound of helicopter blades cut through the forest quiet. Emma stirred at the noise, her eyes opening in fear. "It's okay, sweetheart," Bill reassured her. "That's just the medical helicopter coming to help you. They're going to take you to a hospital where doctors can make you feel better." Emma's small hand clutched at Shadow's fur. "Shadow comes too," she insisted with surprising strength. "Don't leave him, please." Bill's expression softened. "We'll do our best, Emma. But first, let's focus on getting you the help you need." As the helicopter sounds grew louder, Shadow felt his anxiety rising. The noise, the vibrations, the impending arrival of more humans, it all triggered his deepest fears. Yet Emma's hand in his fur anchored him to his purpose. He had found help for her. The mission was nearly complete. The helicopter appeared above the tree canopy, hovering as it searched for a clearing large enough to land. Finding none close enough, it moved to a position directly above them, lowering a rescue basket and a paramedic on a cable. Shadow's instinct to flee nearly overwhelmed him as the strange human descended from the sky, bringing with him unfamiliar scents of antiseptic and medical equipment. Bill seemed to sense the dog's distress, placing a gentle hand on Shadow's shoulder. "Easy, soldier," he murmured. "They're here to help. Stand your ground." The words, so similar to commands Shadow had received in his former life, steadied him. He remained beside Emma as the paramedic touched down, though every muscle in his body trembled with the effort to override his flight response. "I'm Tyler with Pine Creek Emergency Services," the paramedic announced, kneeling beside Emma. "Found her like this?" he asked Bill. "The dog found her," Bill corrected, nodding toward Shadow. "Came and got me, led me right to her. Been keeping her warm through the night from the looks of it." Tyler glanced at Shadow with professional interest as he checked Emma's vital signs. "Smart dog. She's severely dehydrated with probable pneumonia developing. Temperatures 103.5 would have been worse without the body heat he provided." He prepared the rescue basket efficiently. "Sheriff Calloway will want to hear how she ended up out here. Search teams have been combing Riverside Park since yesterday." "She mentioned her stepmother, Diane, leaving her here," Bill said quietly. "Called it an adventure." Tyler's hands paused momentarily in their work. That's Concerning. I'll make sure the sheriff knows. He finished securing Emma in the basket, then reached for his radio to signal the helicopter operator. We're ready for extraction. As the basket began to rise, Emma suddenly became fully alert, her small hand reaching out desperately. Shadow. Don't leave Shadow. Tyler looked from the distressed child to the German shepherd standing vigilant below. We can't take a dog in the medical chopper, sweetheart. But I promise someone will come back for him. No! Emma's cry was piercing even over the helicopter noise. He saved me. He's a military dog. He's hurt too. The basket continued rising despite her protests. Shadow watched helplessly as Emma was lifted away. Her small face crumpled in distress. The mission to save her was accomplished, yet the separation felt like failure. Bill knelt beside Shadow as the helicopter departed with Emma safely aboard. She'll be okay now, thanks to you. But what happens to you next, soldier? You got somewhere to go. Shadow's gaze remained fixed on the sky where the helicopter had disappeared, carrying away the child who had somehow known his name, who had worn tags that smelled of his past life, for the first time in years. Shadow felt the pull of something beyond mere survival, a connection to a world he'd thought forever closed to him. Come on, Bill said finally, gathering his pack. Let's head back to my cabin. I think we both could use some rest and food while we figure out what happens next. Something tells me your story with that little girl isn't finished yet. After a long moment of consideration, Shadow made his decision. With one last look at the hollow beneath the oak tree where he'd kept Emma alive through the night, he turned and followed Bill back through the forest toward an uncertain future, but one that perhaps held more than mere survival. 2 days had passed since Emma's rescue, and Shadow paced restlessly on Bill Thornton's covered porch, his gaze fixed on the forest path. The sanctuary of the cabin had become both refuge and prison, a safe place to recover his strength, but also a reminder of how far he was from Emma. The separation gnawed at him with unexpected intensity. The mission wasn't complete. Something deeper than training told him the child still needed his protection. Bill emerged from the cabin, coffee mug in hand, watching the German shepherd's agitated movements. "You're going to wear a trench in my porch, soldier," he commented, settling into his rocking chair. "Been thinking about that little girl. Haven't you?" Shadow paused, ears pivoting toward Bill's voice. Over the past 48 hours, a tentative trust had formed between them. Bill had kept his distance, offering food and water without demanding contact, speaking in the low, even tones that Shadow associated with his handler from before. Most importantly, Bill had made phone calls checking on Emma's condition at the Pine Creek Medical Center, speaking with Sheriff Calloway about the investigation into her abandonment. "Called the hospital again this morning," Bill continued, sipping his coffee. "Emma's fever's down, pneumonia responding to antibiotics. Sheriff's been trying to question her. But that grandmother of hers, Eleanor, I think is running interference, making sure the kid gets rest." Shadow's ears pricked forward at Emma's name. The information brought some relief, but not enough to quell his growing certainty that something remained unresolved, a threat not yet neutralized. "What I can't figure," Bill mused, "is how that stepmother thought she'd get away with it. Abandoning a child in national forest land, that's attempted murder. Plain and simple." He shook his head. Sheriff says the woman's sticking to her story about Emma wandering off from home, without the kid's testimony. Shadow's attention suddenly shifted, his body tensing as he detected an approaching vehicle. Bill noticed the change immediately. "Someone coming?" he asked, setting down his mug and rising to his feet. "We're pretty far off the beaten path here." Shadow moved to the edge of the porch, scenting the air. The vehicle was still minutes away, but he could detect engine oil, rubber, and most concerning, the sharp chemical scent he'd associated with Diane Thompson on the night she'd abandoned Emma. Bill watched Shadow's reaction with growing concern. "Don't like whoever's coming. Do you—" He disappeared briefly into the cabin, returning with his rifle. "I'll keep this handy, just in case." The black SUV appeared around the bend in the dirt road, moving slowly as if searching for an address. Shadow's hackles rose fully, a low growl building in his chest as he recognized both the vehicle and the driver from that night in the forest. "Easy, Shadow," Bill murmured, though his own posture had stiffened. "Let's see what they want before we jump to conclusions." The SUV pulled to a stop in front of the cabin. After a moment's hesitation, Diane Thompson emerged, dressed immaculately in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that seemed wildly out of place in the rustic setting. Her practiced smile faltered slightly when she spotted Shadow. "Good afternoon," she called, maintaining her distance from the porch. "I'm looking for Bill Thornton. The sheriff's office gave me this address." Bill stepped forward, keeping one hand casually near his rifle. "That's me. And you would be—" "Diane Thompson, Emma's stepmother." Her voice caught theatrically on the words. "I've been sick with worry. The hospital wouldn't let me see her yesterday, some ridiculous confusion about the circumstances in which she was found." She tilted her head, studying Bill with calculating eyes. "I understand you were the one who found my stepdaughter. I came to thank you personally." Shadow's growl deepened. Bill glanced at him briefly before responding. "Actually, this dog here found her. I just followed him to where she was." Diane's gaze shifted to Shadow. Recognition, and something like fear flickering across her features before she composed herself. "A stray led you to her how? Fortunate? Not a stray," Bill corrected. "Military-trained German shepherd. Kept her alive through the night, from what I could tell." Diane took a small step backward. "Well, how wonderful. The doctor said she might have died without that body heat through the storm." She paused, then added with practiced concern, "I've been beside myself trying to understand how she wandered so far from home. She must have been sleepwalking." Shadow advanced to the edge of the porch steps, his body language unmistakably hostile. Bill made no move to restrain him. "Funny thing," Bill said conversationally. "Emma mentioned you drove her out there, called it an adventure, said you left her with that little backpack." The color drained from Diane's face, though her smile remained fixed. "Children say all sorts of things when they're feverish. The doctors said she was quite delirious." "Maybe," Bill acknowledged. Sheriff Calloway seemed mighty interested, though. Diane's hand dipped into her purse, withdrawing a cell phone. "I should call my husband's attorney to clear up this misunderstanding. Poor Emma's been so confused since her father went missing in action." She glanced at her watch with manufactured concern. "I should get back to the hospital. They said she might be released tomorrow if her fever stays down." Shadow sensed the shift in her demeanor, the spike of anxiety beneath her controlled exterior, the subtle change in her scent that suggested decision-making, calculation. His military training had taught him to recognize when a subject was preparing to flee or attack. Diane Thompson was planning something. "Actually," Bill said, stepping down from the porch, "I was about to head into town myself. Why don't I follow you back? Been meaning to check on Emma in person." Diane's smile tightened. "That's really not necessary. You've done more than enough already." "No trouble at all," Bill insisted. "Just let me grab my keys." As Bill turned toward the cabin door, Shadow caught a subtle movement, Diane's hand shifting in her purse again, this time emerging with something small and metallic that she concealed against her wrist. The glint of steel triggered Shadow's protective instincts instantly. With a powerful leap, Shadow cleared the porch steps, positioning himself between Bill and Diane. His warning bark was loud enough to make both humans freeze. "Shadow," Bill questioned, turning back. "What's got into—" The question died as Diane raised her hand, a small pistol now clearly visible. "Call off your dog," she demanded, her cultivated facade crumbling. "Now!" Bill raised his hand slowly. "Ma'am, you're making a serious mistake here." The mistake was Emma surviving to tell her story. Diane snapped, her voice hardening. "Do you have any idea what's at stake? What that child knows?" The gun wavered slightly in her grip. "I never wanted to hurt her. I just needed her gone long enough to clean everything up. She wasn't supposed to be found so quickly." Shadow held his ground, his training activating fully for the first time since his escape from the fighting rings. He assessed the threat methodically, small-caliber weapon, inexperienced handling, unstable emotional state, high risk to Bill, who stood exposed without cover. "Whatever's going on," Bill said calmly, "this isn't going to solve it. Put the gun down before you do something you can't take back." "It's already too late for that," Diane replied, a note of hysteria entering her voice. "Frank wasn't supposed to discover the operation. He wasn't supposed to send those documents home. Once they found out, he knew." She steadied the gun, aiming more deliberately at Bill. "I just need a little more time. The contact is coming tonight to clear everything. After that, it won't matter what Emma says." Shadow calculated his options. The tactical assessment automatic after years of training. The distance between himself and Diane was approximately 12 feet too far for a direct lunge without giving her time to fire. Bill stood 6 feet behind him, fully exposed. The optimal approach would be to feint, drawing her fire while giving Bill time to retreat to cover. Decision made. Shadow barked sharply once an alert signal before darting laterally across Diane's field of vision. As expected, her attention and aim followed his movement. "Stop, stay back," she shouted, the gun tracking Shadow's movement instead of remaining on Bill. Bill understood the diversion instantly, diving for the cover of the porch as Shadow continued his evasive pattern, never offering a clean shot while drawing Diane further from her vehicle. The sound of a shotgun being racked froze everyone in place. "Pine Creek Sheriff's Department." Sheriff Calloway's voice rang out from the tree line where his patrol SUV had silently approached during the confrontation. "Drop the weapon, Mrs. Thompson." Diane hesitated, her eyes darting between Shadow, Bill, and the sheriff now emerging from cover with shotgun raised. For a terrible moment, Shadow read her body language, preparing for a suicidal final stand. Shadow made his decision in that split second of hesitation. Launching forward with explosive power, he closed the distance before Diane could redirect her aim, his jaws clamping around her wrist with precise pressure enough to force her to drop the weapon without causing serious injury. Exactly as he'd been trained to do in his military role. Diane screamed, more from shock than pain, as the pistol clattered to the ground. Shadow immediately released her and retreated, positioning himself between the fallen weapon and its owner until Sheriff Calloway approached with handcuffs ready. "Diane Thompson, you're under arrest," the sheriff announced, securing her hands behind her back. "Attempted murder, child endangerment, and now assault with a deadly weapon. You've been busy." As a deputy emerged from the sheriff's vehicle to secure the scene, Sheriff Calloway turned to Bill. "You okay?" "Thornton?" Bill nodded, retrieving his rifle from the porch. "Fine. Thanks to Shadow here. He gave me the warning I needed." He studied the sheriff with narrowed eyes. "How'd you happen to show up at just the right moment?" Sheriff Calloway smiled grimly. "Emma woke up this morning. Once her grandmother got her calmed down, she told us everything, including how Diane threatened her about some documents her father had hidden. Said they proved her daddy wasn't really missing, just hiding." He glanced at Diane, who had gone silent in the deputy's custody. "When we went to pick up Mrs. Thompson for questioning, her neighbor mentioned she'd asked for directions to your cabin. Thought we'd better follow up." Shadow watched the human speaking, his tactical mindset gradually subsiding as the immediate threat was contained. His attention remained fixed on Diane as she was placed in the patrol car, his instincts still signaling that the mission wasn't complete. "What about the contact she mentioned?" Bill asked, nodding toward Diane. "Someone coming tonight to clear everything. Already on it," Sheriff Calloway replied. "FBI's been notified. Turns out Frank Thompson wasn't just any soldier, he was military intelligence, working on an investigation into defense contract fraud. Worth millions." He knelt to examine Shadow more closely, noting the scars and the military bearing. This dog. Emma was insistent he was her father's military working dog. Said his name was Shadow. Bill nodded. "That's what she called him. And he sure responds to it." Sheriff Calloway extended his hand slowly, allowing Shadow to sniff it before carefully examining the area on his shoulder where a military tattoo would be placed. After brushing aside the thick fur, his expression changed to one of stunned recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured. ST-7623. That's a military working dog ID. He looked up at Bill in amazement. This actually is a military dog, one that went missing during transport about 2 years ago, if I remember the bulletin correctly. He stood, shaking his head in disbelief. The odds of him finding Frank Thompson's daughter in those woods. "Some things defy odds," Bill said quietly. "What happens to him now?" Sheriff Calloway studied Shadow thoughtfully. "By rights, he should be returned to the military, but given his condition," he gestured to the numerous scars visible through Shadow's coat, "someone's treated this dog badly, very badly." Shadow listened to their discussion about his fate with unusual attentiveness. The mention of returning to military service triggered conflicting responses, the comfort of structure and purpose warring with new traumas that made the thought of captivity, even benevolent, nearly unbearable. But beneath these concerns ran a deeper current of determination. Emma was still in danger. Whatever conspiracy had led Diane to abandon her stepdaughter in the forest wasn't fully neutralized. The contact coming tonight represented a continuing threat, as if reading his thoughts. Sheriff Calloway turned to Shadow. "I think there's someone at the hospital who'd be mighty glad to see you. Boy, what do you say we take a ride into town?" Shadow's ears pricked forward at the suggestion. This, at least, aligned perfectly with his own mission parameters. Emma needed protection, and he needed to complete his assignment. Everything else, his past, his future, the humans who would decide his fate, could wait, with new purpose. Shadow followed Sheriff Calloway to the patrol car, each step taking him closer to Emma and to whatever dangers still threatened her. For the first time since his escape from the fighting rings, Shadow moved not with the furtive caution of a fugitive, but with the confident stride of a soldier returning to duty. The storm returned with unexpected fury that evening, lashing Pine Creek with driving rain and wind that bent the pines like matchsticks. Inside the hospital's pediatric wing, Emma Thompson sat propped against pillows, her small face brightening as Shadow was led through the door by Sheriff Calloway. Despite hospital regulations strictly prohibiting animals, exceptions had been made after Eleanor Thompson's formidable insistence that the dog who saved her granddaughter deserved special consideration. "Shadow," Emma called, her voice still weak but filled with genuine joy. She extended her arms as the German shepherd approached her bedside, his movements careful and measured despite his own excitement. Eleanor Thompson, a silver-haired woman with Frank's determined jawline and watchful eyes, observed from her chair beside the bed. "So, this is the hero we've been hearing about," she said, studying Shadow with keen interest. "Frank's dog, after all this time." Shadow approached Emma's hospital bed cautiously, mindful of the IV line in her arm and the monitoring equipment surrounding her. The sterile hospital scents, antiseptic, medication. The underlying current of illness triggered unpleasant memories of veterinary treatments after particularly brutal fights. Yet Emma's familiar scent cut through these associations, anchoring him to the present with exquisite gentleness. Shadow rested his muzzle on the edge of the mattress, allowing Emma to stroke his scarred head. The touch of her small fingers against his fur sent a wave of protective warmth through him that overshadowed his lingering discomfort with the hospital environment. "I told them you'd come," Emma whispered to him, leaning closer. "I knew you wouldn't forget about me." Sheriff Calloway cleared his throat. "Emma, I need to ask you something important. Your grandmother says it's okay." He pulled a chair closer to the bed, sitting at eye level with the child. "You told us Diane left you in the woods, but I need to know more about why. You mentioned something about papers your daddy sent home." Emma's hand stilled on Shadow's fur, her expression suddenly guarded. Shadow sensed her anxiety spike, her scent changing subtly with fear. "It's okay, sweetheart," Eleanor reassured her. "Sheriff Calloway is helping us find Daddy. You can tell him." Emma looked down at Shadow, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Daddy sent a package home before he disappeared. He said if anything happened to him, I should give the papers to his friend Colonel Westfield." Her small fingers twisted in Shadow's fur. "But when I told Diane about it, After we got the news about Daddy being missing, she got really mad. She started looking everywhere for it. Did she find this package? Sheriff Calloway asked gently. Emma shook her head. No. I hid it in my special place after Daddy called. He said it was our secret mission. Pride flickered briefly across her tired features. Diane kept asking me where it was. The night she took me to the woods, she got a phone call that made her really angry. She said time's up, and that we needed to go right away. Shadow listened intently. The mention of a mission and Colonel Westfield triggering more fragments of memory. Westfield had been present during some of Shadow's training exercises, a tall man with a voice that carried authority across the training field. Emma, Sheriff Calloway continued carefully, do you still have this package? Is it somewhere safe? The girl nodded. In my castle, at Grandma's house. Eleanor's eyes widened with sudden understanding. The dollhouse Frank built for her last Christmas. There's a hidden compartment in the tower. Sheriff Calloway stood immediately. Mrs. Thompson, we need to secure that package right away. Based on what Diane told us and what she let slip at Bill's cabin, someone's coming to retrieve those documents tonight. Someone who's already involved in whatever got your son into hiding. The sheriff's radio crackled to life before Eleanor could respond. Sheriff, this is Deputy Reynolds. We've got a situation at the Thompson residence. Black sedan, diplomatic plates, 2 males attempting to enter the property. FBI has been notified, but they're still 20 minutes out. Shadow's body tensed at the urgency in the deputy's voice. The threat to Emma wasn't over. It had merely relocated. His military training assessed the situation automatically. Emma was temporarily safe in the hospital. But the evidence that could protect her and her father was now the target. Sheriff Calloway unclipped his radio. Maintain surveillance. Reynolds, do not engage. I'm on my way. He turned to Eleanor. Mrs. Thompson, I need you to stay here with Emma. The hospital security has been briefed. No one gets in without proper identification. What about Shadow? Emma asked, her hand tightening in his fur. He stays with me. Right. The sheriff hesitated, looking at the German shepherd with newfound consideration. Actually, I could use his help. If these are the same people who orchestrated your father's disappearance, they're professionals. Having a military-trained dog might give us an edge. Shadow's ears pricked forward at the implicit invitation to return to service. The mission parameters were clear. Protect Emma. Secure the evidence. Neutralize the threat. His training and instincts aligned perfectly for the first time since his escape. No, Emma protested, tears filling her eyes. They'll hurt him. He's already hurt so much. Eleanor leaned forward, taking Emma's hand. Sweetheart, sometimes the bravest thing isn't staying to fight, but going to get help. That's what Shadow did for you in the woods. Maybe that's what he needs to do again, help Sheriff Calloway protect the evidence that could bring your daddy home. Shadow nuzzled Emma's hand, trying to communicate reassurance. The child's distress tore at him, but the tactical situation was clear. The greatest threat to her safety lay not in the hospital, but with those seeking to destroy her father's evidence. He'll come back, Emma, Sheriff Calloway promised. You have my word. After a moment of silent struggle, Emma nodded reluctantly. You'll be careful. Right. Shadow promise. Shadow pressed his muzzle against her cheek in silent affirmation before turning to stand beside the sheriff, his posture shifting subtly from companion to working dog. "I'll call the moment we secure the package," Sheriff Calloway assured Eleanor. "Hospital security knows to let no one through except medical personnel with proper credentials." As they moved toward the door, Emma called out one last time, "Sheriff, if you find Daddy's friend Colonel Westfield's number in the papers, call him. Daddy said he would help if there was trouble." Sheriff Calloway nodded. "We will, Emma." In the hallway outside Emma's room, Shadow paused, his attention drawn to a man in scrubs studying a chart at the nurse's station. Something about his posture, too rigid, too alert, triggered Shadow's suspicion. The man's eyes followed them with too much interest, his scent carrying traces of gun oil beneath the hospital antiseptic. Shadow growled softly, alerting the sheriff to the potential threat. Calloway noticed his reaction, following Shadow's gaze to the man, who quickly averted his eyes and moved down the hallway. "Good catch," Calloway murmured, immediately signaling to the security guard at the end of the corridor. "Keep an eye on that individual in the blue scrubs," he instructed quietly. "No one gets into the Thompson room without triple verification." As they exited the hospital into the stormy night, Shadow's mind processed the tactical situation with clarity he hadn't experienced since his military service. Emma remained vulnerable, surrounded by potential threats. The evidence that could end those threats was at risk. Time was critical, the mission was clear, and Shadow was back on duty. The rain pelted against the sheriff's vehicle as they sped through Pine Creek's deserted streets toward Eleanor Thompson's home on the outskirts of town. Shadow sat alert in the passenger seat, his scarred face occasionally illuminated by passing streetlights. Sheriff Calloway glanced at his unusual partner with a mixture of amazement and professional assessment. "Never thought I'd be working with a four-legged deputy," he remarked, navigating a sharp turn. "But given what we're up against, I'm glad to have you." Shadow's attention remained fixed on the road ahead, his military training resurfacing with each passing minute, the familiarity of the situation moving toward a tactical encounter, assessment of unknown threats, protection of critical intelligence awoke muscle memories long suppressed during his years of captivity and solitary survival. "Deputy Reynolds," Calloway spoke into his radio. "Status report." The radio crackled. "Two subjects still attempting access to the Thompson residence. They're being careful lockpicks, not forced entry. Claiming to be federal agents if anyone approaches, but credentials don't match database. FBI tactical team diverted due to flooded roads, ETA now 40 minutes. Maintain surveillance only," Calloway instructed. "I'm 3 minutes out with specialized backup." As they approached Eleanor Thompson's neighborhood, Calloway killed the lights and slowed the vehicle. "We'll stop here and approach on foot," he told Shadow, as if the dog fully understood the tactical decision. "Less chance of alerting them to our presence." Shadow leapt from the vehicle as soon as the door opened, immediately adopting a tactical movement pattern, staying low, using available cover, moving silently despite the rain-soaked ground. Sheriff Calloway followed, impressed by the dog's obvious training. "Deputy Reynolds," Calloway whispered into his radio, "I'm approaching from the south with the dog. Hold your position." They advanced through the residential backyards, the storm providing both cover for their approach and challenges for surveillance. Through gaps in fencing, Shadow could make out Eleanor Thompson's 2-story craftsman home, darkened except for a single porch light, its yard backing against the edge of the forest. A black sedan with diplomatic plates sat 2 houses down, its engine off, but a driver still behind the wheel. Shadow's enhanced vision detected two figures at the rear of the house, one keeping watch while the other worked on the back door lock. Sheriff Calloway assessed the situation with a veteran's eye. Two outside, one in the vehicle, probably more professional than they appear. He checked his service weapon, then looked at Shadow. "I need to coordinate with Reynolds. Can you understand what we need to do here?" Shadow met the sheriff's gaze with an intensity that answered the question. Calloway nodded slowly, making a decision. "Shadow, watch," he commanded in a low, firm voice, pointing toward the intruders. To his amazement, the German shepherd immediately focused his attention where directed, body language shifting to full alert status. The sheriff smiled grimly. Military training indeed, moving with practiced quiet. Calloway circled to rendezvous with Deputy Reynolds, who was positioned behind a garden shed offering a view of both the house and the sedan. Shadow remained at his observation post, analyzing the intruders with tactical precision. Their movements suggested professional training, economy of motion, constant environmental awareness, coordinated signals. These weren't common criminals. They operated with the disciplined efficiency Shadow recognized from his military days. The lock on Eleanor's back door finally yielded, and the two figures slipped inside the darkened house. Through the kitchen window, Shadow could track their flashlight beams moving methodically through the ground floor. Sheriff Calloway returned, crouching beside Shadow. "Reynolds is moving to block the driver from leaving. FBI says these men match descriptions of contractors working for Vortec Industries, the defense company Frank Thompson was investigating." He checked his watch. "We need to contain them until the FBI arrives, but more importantly, we need to secure that evidence before they find it." Shadow processed this information against his primary mission parameters: protect Emma, secure the evidence, neutralize the threat. The intruder's presence inside the house where the evidence was hidden elevated the situation to immediate action status. Calloway seemed to read his thoughts. "I'm going in through the front. Need you to create a distraction at the side of the house, something to draw at least one of them away from the second floor where Emma's room is located." He pointed to a side window. "Can you make some noise over there in about 30 seconds? Shadow didn't wait for further instruction. Moving like a shadow through the rain-soaked garden, he positioned himself near the indicated window, timing his approach to Calloway's movements toward the front porch. When the sheriff reached the front door, Shadow launched into action with calculated force. He knocked over a row of potted plants beneath the side window, creating a cascading crash that echoed through the storm. The effect was immediate. One of the flashlight beams inside jerked toward the sound, and hurried footsteps moved down the stairs toward the disturbance. Shadow retreated to the shadows as a window blind was pushed aside, a face peering out into the darkness. Sheriff Calloway used this moment to enter through the front door, his approach masked by the thunder and the intruder's distraction. Shadow circled back toward the rear of the house, finding a pet door likely installed for a previous owner's cat that provided him narrow but adequate access, squeezing through with silent determination. Shadow entered the mudroom adjacent to the kitchen. His paws made no sound on the tile floor as he navigated through the unfamiliar house. Guided by scent and sound toward the second intruder, who continued searching upstairs. Shadow could hear Sheriff Calloway announcing his presence to the first intruder. "Pine Creek Sheriff's Department hands where I can see them," followed by the predictable sounds of resistance furniture overturning, glass breaking, the thud of bodies in physical confrontation. Upstairs. The second intruder had reached Emma's bedroom, evident by the flashlight beam now focused on a large, elaborate dollhouse positioned near the window, a medieval castle complete with towers and a drawbridge. Shadow watched from the hallway as the man methodically began dismantling the structure, searching for the hidden compartment Emma had mentioned. When the man's back was turned, Shadow made his move. Years of fighting pit experience combined with military training as he launched himself in complete silence, targeting the intruder's dominant arm with surgical precision. His jaws closed around the man's wrist with exactly enough pressure to immobilize without causing permanent damage, a technique perfected during his service days. The intruder's scream of surprise and pain echoed through the house as his flashlight clattered to the floor. He attempted to shake Shadow off, but the German Shepherd held firm, forcing the man to his knees through the careful application of pressure and leverage. Below, the sounds of struggle had ceased, suggesting Calloway had subdued the first intruder. Shadow maintained his hold, even as the man in his grip reached desperately toward his ankle with his free hand. Recognizing the movement as an attempt to access a concealed weapon, Shadow adjusted his grip, a growl of warning rumbling through his chest. Sheriff Calloway appeared in the doorway, slightly winded but in control. "I wouldn't move if I were you," he advised the kneeling intruder. "That dog was military trained for threat neutralization, and you're currently classified as a threat." With efficient movements, the sheriff secured the man's hands behind his back, allowing Shadow to release his grip. "Shadow, guard," Calloway commanded, indicating the subdued intruder before moving to examine the partially dismantled dollhouse. Located in the highest tower, just as Emma had described, was a hidden compartment activated by rotating a small decorative shield. Inside lay a USB drive and a sealed envelope addressed to Colonel James Westfield, Special Operations Command, in handwriting that stirred something in Shadow's memory. "Well, I'll be damned," Calloway murmured, carefully securing the items in an evidence bag. Frank Thompson hid his insurance policy in plain sight, protected by a child's innocence. He glanced at Shadow with newfound respect. "And you, somehow, found your way back to your handler's family when they needed you most." The sound of additional vehicles arriving outside signaled the FBI's presence. Sheriff Calloway secured both intruders before retrieving his radio. "This is Calloway. Evidence is secure. 2 suspects in custody. We'll need a forensic team to process the scene and check for additional surveillance devices." As FBI agents entered and took control of the scene, Calloway knelt beside Shadow, examining a gash on the dog's shoulder that had opened during the confrontation. "Looks like you've added another scar to your collection. Soldier, let's get that looked at. Then head back to Emma." Mission accomplished. Shadow allowed the attention to his wound, his focus already shifting back to Emma. The evidence was secured, immediate threats neutralized, but his protective instinct remained on high alert. Something about the intruder's professionalism suggested a larger operation than just 2 men. The driver of the sedan, for instance, had disappeared before deputies could apprehend him. An FBI agent approached, introducing herself as Special Agent Keller. "Sheriff, we need to move quickly. Based on initial assessment of the documents, we're dealing with a significant defense contract fraud case involving Vortec Industries. If Frank Thompson obtained evidence of their illegal weapons sales, there could be more contractors looking to silence him and anyone connected to him." Calloway's expression darkened. Including his daughter. Especially his daughter. Agent Keller confirmed. If she's mentioned in his notes as knowing about these documents, we need to get back to the hospital. Calloway interrupted, already moving toward the door with Shadow at his heels. As they rushed back to the vehicle through the still pouring rain, Shadow's anxiety mounted. The tactical situation had evolved while they had secured the evidence. They had potentially accelerated the timeline for any remaining threats against Emma. The suspicious medical staff member Shadow had noticed earlier took on new significance in light of this information. The drive back to Pine Creek Medical Center seemed endless. Even with emergency lights cutting through the storm, Shadow stood tensely in the passenger seat, ears forward, every muscle primed for action. Sheriff Calloway made urgent radio calls ahead, ordering additional security for Emma's room and a lockdown of the pediatric floor. As they finally pulled into the hospital parking lot, Shadow caught sight of a figure hurrying toward the emergency exit, the same man in scrubs he'd noticed earlier, now wearing a rain jacket but moving with the same unnatural alertness. More concerning was the small case he carried, similar to medical equipment but held with unusual care. Without waiting for Calloway, Shadow burst from the vehicle the moment the door opened, racing across the rain-slicked pavement toward the suspicious individual. The man spotted the charging German shepherd, and his composure broke. He dropped the case and reached inside his jacket. The metallic glint of a silenced pistol appeared just as Shadow launched himself through the air. A missile of fur and focused determination. Years of battlefield training combined with the raw power developed in fighting pits as Shadow struck the man with precision, his weight and momentum driving the assailant to the ground before he could aim his weapon. The silenced pistol discharged harmlessly into the pavement as Shadow secured the man's gun arm in his jaws. Applying immobilizing pressure while avoiding lethal force, Sheriff Calloway arrived seconds later, weapon drawn. "Federal agent," the man gasped. "Call off your dog. Federal agents don't carry silenced weapons in hospitals." Calloway responded coldly, kicking the pistol away. "Shadow, hold!" As Calloway secured the third intruder, Shadow's attention turned to the dropped case, which had fallen open to reveal vials and syringes, not medical supplies, but something far more sinister. His mission hadn't just been complicated, it had been a near catastrophe. The reality was suddenly, chillingly clear. While they had secured the evidence, Emma herself had remained the primary target all along. 3 months passed with the gentle rhythm that defines small towns like Pine Creek, where even extraordinary events eventually settle into the collective memory like stones in a riverbed, present, but no longer disrupting the flow of daily life. The autumn that had nearly claimed Emma Thompson's life gave way to the first tentative warmth of spring, bringing with it new beginnings that no one could have anticipated on that stormy night. Eleanor Thompson's front porch had become Shadow's favorite spot, a compromise between his lingering need for vigilance and his growing comfort with domestic life. The German shepherd lay stretched in the afternoon sun, his scarred body relaxed, but his amber eyes still maintaining their watchful gaze on the driveway. Old habits formed in battle and hardened in survival didn't disappear entirely, even as new patterns emerged. "Still on guard duty, I see," Eleanor observed as she settled into her rocking chair, a glass of iced tea in hand. Her weathered fingers reached down to scratch behind Shadow's ears, a liberty he now allowed without flinching. "Emma will be home from school soon. Last day before spring break." Shadow's ears perked up at Emma's name. his tail thumping once against the wooden porch. The child had become the center of his reconstituted world, his purpose, and his healing both embodied in her resilient spirit. In the months since her rescue, they had formed a bond that transcended conventional understanding, each helping the other recover from wounds both visible and hidden. The investigation into Vortec Industries had expanded far beyond Pine Creek, making national headlines as a complex web of defense contract fraud, illegal weapons sales, and attempted murder unraveled. Frank Thompson's evidence, safely delivered to military authorities, had proven more significant than anyone anticipated, exposing corruption that reached into the highest levels of government contracting. Diane Thompson had accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony against her co-conspirators, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of federal charges. Emma, with the resilience unique to children, had processed this betrayal with the help of a kind therapist and the unwavering support of her grandmother and Shadow. The sound of the school bus rumbling down the road drew Shadow to his feet, his posture alert but no longer tense with anxiety. Every day for 3 months. He had greeted Emma's return from school with the same ritual, meeting her at the end of the driveway, escorting her safely to the house, then listening attentively as she shared stories of her day. Today, however, something was different. As the bus stopped and Emma descended the steps, Shadow detected a change in her scent, an elevation in excitement that surpassed her usual after-school energy. She was practically bouncing as she ran toward him, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Shadow, Grandma! He's coming home!" she shouted, wrapping her arms around the German shepherd's neck. "Daddy's coming home tomorrow." Eleanor stood, her hand rising to her mouth. "The military called." Emma nodded vigorously, her entire body vibrating with joy. "Colonel Westfield called the school. He said Daddy's been debriefed and cleared to come home. He's flying in tomorrow morning." Shadow absorbed this news with complex emotions. Frank Thompson, his former handler's brother, Emma's father. The man whose secret evidence had triggered all these events remained a missing piece in Shadow's fragmented memory. The name stirred something deep and familiar, yet just beyond clear recollection. "Well," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "We'd better get this place ready then, hadn't we?" She smiled at Emma. "And you, young lady, have a very special introduction to make." Emma knelt beside Shadow, taking his scarred face gently between her hands. "Daddy's going to be so happy to meet you, Shadow. I've told him all about how you saved me." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "And I think he might have a surprise for you, too." That evening passed in a flurry of preparation rooms aired, fresh linens placed on beds, favorite foods prepared. Shadow observed the joyful activity with attentive curiosity, sensing the shift in household energy. As darkness fell, he took his customary position at the foot of Emma's bed, vigilant even in rest. "Are you nervous about meeting Daddy?" Emma asked as she snuggled under her covers. "Because you don't need to be. He loves dogs, especially brave ones like you." Shadow rested his muzzle on the edge of the mattress, allowing Emma to stroke the white fur that had begun to appear around his battle-scarred muzzle. In the 3 months since Emma's rescue, Shadow had gradually learned to accept gentle touches again, to sleep without startling at every sound, to trust that not all humans brought pain. "I wish you could tell me your story," Emma murmured, her eyes growing heavy with sleep. "Where you came from? How you got all those scars? How you found me in the woods that day?" Her small hand rested on his head. "But maybe some stories don't need words." Morning arrived with perfect clarity, one of those rare spring days where the air itself seems washed clean. Shadow paced the front porch with uncharacteristic restlessness as Eleanor and Emma prepared for the drive to the small regional airport. When they emerged, Emma knelt to look him in the eyes. "We'll be back in 2 hours. Shadow, you guard the house." "Okay." She hugged him tightly. "When we come back, Daddy will be with us." Shadow watched their car disappear down the driveway with mixed emotions. His place was with Emma. His self-appointed mission to protect her had not wavered. Yet something about this impending reunion stirred anxieties deep within him. What if Frank Thompson didn't want a battle-scarred fighting dog around his daughter? What if his arrival meant the end of Shadow's place in this newly found home? The 2 hours of their absence stretched endlessly. Shadow alternated between vigilant patrols of the property perimeter and restless returns to the front porch, his senses hyper-alert for the sound of a returning vehicle. When he finally detected the approach of Eleanor's car, accompanied by an unfamiliar scent carried on the spring breeze, he positioned himself at the top of the porch steps, alert, dignified, and prepared for whatever came next. The car door opened, and Emma burst out first. "Shadow, we're home!" she called, waving excitedly. Eleanor emerged next, her face transformed by joy, and then, from the passenger side, a tall man in civilian clothes stepped out, his movements displaying the unmistakable discipline of military bearing despite his casual attire. Frank Thompson stood for a moment, staring at the German shepherd on the porch with an expression of disbelief that gradually transformed into wonder. "It can't be," he whispered, just loud enough for Shadow to hear. Shadow's body went completely still, a cascade of fragmented memories suddenly coalescing at the sound of that voice. Not his handler's voice similar, but different. The voice of someone who had been present during training exercises, who had sometimes brought treats and spoken kind words. "Daddy, that's Shadow. He saved me in the woods when I was sick," Emma explained, tugging at her father's hand. Frank Thompson slowly approached the porch steps, his eyes never leaving the German shepherd. "Emma, honey, this isn't just any military dog," he said softly. This is Atlas, my brother Mike's partner, the dog who saved his life in Afghanistan before Mike was transferred to Special Forces training." Shadow Atlas felt something profound shift within him at the sound of his original name. Long-buried memories surfaced: training fields, the weight of tactical gear, the bond with his handler, the brother who sometimes visited them. "But Atlas went missing during transport after being injured," Frank continued, carefully extending his hand, palm up toward the German shepherd. "Mike never stopped looking for him. Even now, stationed overseas. He keeps Atlas's photo with him." Shadow hesitated only briefly before stepping forward to sniff the offered hand. Detecting familiar notes beneath the surface scents, a genetic similarity to his handler that confirmed this man's identity. With deliberate gentleness, he pressed his muzzle into Frank's palm. "Welcome home, Atlas," Frank whispered, carefully kneeling to meet the dog at eye level. "You found your way back to family after all." Emma joined them, wrapping one arm around her father and the other around Shadow's neck. "See, I told you he was special. Daddy. He knew who I was in the woods. He knew I needed help." As the family moved inside together, Emma chattering excitedly, Eleanor wiping away tears, Frank still gazing at Shadow with amazement, the German shepherd felt the final pieces of his fractured world settling into place. The mission that had begun in those woods with a small, abandoned child had led him not just to safety, but to belonging. That evening, as shadows lengthened across Eleanor Thompson's living room, Frank received a video call that he immediately brought to Shadow. On the screen appeared a face that triggered the deepest recognition: Mike Thompson, Shadow's original handler, his eyes widening in disbelief as he caught sight of the scarred but unmistakable German shepherd. "Atlas." Mike's voice cracked with emotion. "Is it really you?" "Boy." Shadow pressed his nose to the screen, whining softly in recognition. As Emma wrapped her arms around his neck, "He saved me. Uncle Mike," she said proudly. "Just like Daddy said he saved you." "He always completes his mission," Mike replied, wiping at his eyes. "Always finds his way home." As the family talked late into the evening, making plans for Mike's upcoming leave and Shadow's future, the German shepherd settled contentedly between Emma and Frank on the sofa. The scars of his past would always remain visible reminders of the cruelty he had endured, but they no longer defined him. He was Atlas again. He was Shadow. He was home. They say God works in mysterious ways, but I've found that sometimes His most powerful angels walk on 4 legs. The story of Shadow, a broken German shepherd carrying the scars of mankind's cruelty, reminds us that even in our darkest moments, redemption awaits. Like many of us who've weathered life's storms, Shadow's body bore the visible marks of his suffering, but his spirit remained unbroken. When little Emma Thompson lay abandoned in those woods, this wounded warrior could have turned away, protecting himself from further pain. Instead, he chose courage, chose to trust again despite